Cave Hobby Show. Special episode, actually the first episode, the intro episode. This is one that really is about me and what I've come across with, what I've came along with, which is all my hobbies and my main hobby, racing. But with this episode, I don't want it to be about me, but the guy that got me all involved in all my hobbies, especially racing. This man has retired in Air Force for 21 years, has played all the major sports from football to baseball to softball to basketball, all things from high school to college, even in his career. My friend, my crew chief, my dad, Steve Mullaney. What's going on today, Steve?
Super excited. Thanks for all the titles.
Thanks. I tried to create some type of big intro. I know if we didn't have the whole racing aspect, everything was kind of silent with the Air Force. Most of the stuff you did was in the Air Force. Obviously, with football and everything was more of a college thing, but it's not like you went into the NFL like our great-grandfather did. So the reason I wanted to start off with episode 1 is because you are the reason that I got into racing. You're the one that started all my hobbies, my problems, the Mullaney curse, whatever you want to bring it up as. And you've been through it all. You know what it took to get started, what it's become. So this episode is about me and you, mainly you, but basically about racing. So I got to start off at the beginning is, where did racing come about? I know in the beginning we just watched NASCAR. That was kind of the only main thing. Grandpa was into drag racing, so there was some racing there. But when we were down back in Florida, where I lived most of my life and half of your life, I would say, that there was no racing involved. It was still softball, maybe a little bit of football, but mainly softball. So where did racing come into play?
Well, I think it wasn't planned, but my Uncle Tim Mullaney, when I was growing up, I had a passion for going to see the races. And I've seen...
What kind of races when you say?
Stock car racing, especially dirt racing. And that was in Pennsylvania, Maryland. And every summer, just about every weekend, I'd go from Ohio to Cumberland, Maryland, and meet up with my uncle. And it was our thing. And it was so exciting. And it was such an adrenaline rush just to watch these guys do what they do. Mm-hmm. And never thought anything more of it than, just being a fan of it. And today, I'm still a fan of it. Racing and everything about it. It's kind of like the Clint Eastwood, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And there's many directions you can go to, but I just enjoyed it so much. And I never had any idea I'd ever get into it, and it was by dumb luck that we ever did.
Yeah, so in the beginning, again, like I said, you played the football, played basketball, even we did church ball, stuff like that, and you were an umpire for some softball. You played military, I guess it would be considered military softball.
Right.
I don't know if it's just Air Force, but you umped, you reffed, you did everything around all the major sports. But where did racing come into play for the small Mullaney crew?
Well, it was just, your mom and I had our own thing of playing sports, and you guys basically just tagged along, mm-hmm. and you were pretty much raised on a diamond or some type of a field. I've been playing sports competitively. Now, when I say competitively, it's at a special level. Even when I played softball, it was A-ball. When I played football, it was NTFL. It wasn't just, neighborhood stuff. So the competitive drive that I had has always been there. And to be the best, to put 110% in it. And, sometimes that's costly because it takes up your time or money, family, friends, or whatever it is. But, with us as a family, all having something to do, your sister won how many state titles, and she went on. Your mom played amateur sand volleyball down in Florida.
So I was going to add on there. So probably a lot of this show, and I apologize for the lighter. We're trying to make it smell nice in here. It is still a man cave, and men Can smell at times. But the one thing about this show that I've had a lot of my family members in there, or will be having a lot of my family members in here. My uncle, I would like to bring my sister on, my mom on, my grandfather, my or not my great grandfather, my uncle. A lot of my family, as you can tell, we're hobbyists, day in and day out, and everything we do 100%, and usually end up pretty good at it. And so when racing, that's why I said racing wasn't really involved, is because with Adria, my sister, and my mom, big into volleyball. You were very successful in football in the college years and even in high school. And then you and my mom did competitive softball, travel ball, stuff like that. So racing really wasn't around for any of that. So how did it go from all those hardcore sports? Now I will say you were very good at football. I never got into football. Obviously, body styles are a lot different.
That's kind of how this all started. Your mom and Adria had volleyball, and we had nothing. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you were younger and stuff like that, but you played your soccer and you had your sports, but it just, I don't know, there was something about it that I just could feel that wasn't your deal. And you were kind of smaller for your age. Yep. I wasn't going to stand there and watch you play soccer. Nothing wrong with soccer. Just doesn't get my adrenaline going. But now that I've learned more about it, like some of these hobbies that you'll go over, there's some of these are really neat that you know nothing about.
Yeah.
And same with racing. And what it leads into is, I just thought that we could get a yard cart. They were called like dune buggies back then. That was, oh my gosh, what was that, 90 or 2000 maybe?
Oh, I had a little pit bike as well. And then during the years, now this was a little during the racing or in the beginning of the racing, but we still had the pit bike as well, or the pocket rocket was what it was called.
Yeah, that was probably the first thing you ever drove was your pocket. I remember sleeping overnight trying to get one of those for you at Pep Boys because they were so popular back then. But then kind of cars, Hot Wheels, we started watching it together, and it just became like our thing, racing and collecting, cards and stuff like that. But kind of the sports part of it went away, and it was more this racing that started to draw us together more, or draw us to it. And
because we still would have our Sunday NASCARs, we would still watch that together.
Oh, yeah.
And then with Grandpa with his drag racing, we'd still go watch him. So there was still racing involved. So what was the trigger?
So I was looking for a yard cart for us, just to have something, a hobby for us to do it together, and I didn't, we lived on base at the time, so we were kind of limited, but where we lived on base had a nice field in the back. And I started looking into it, and, the internet wasn't all what it is now, but there's stuff that started to pop up because when I was looking to buy something, all these other carts came up. And I'm like, these are they call them race carts. And I was like, wow, this is pretty cool. So I started doing all my research, and I think the first thing that caught my eye was the age that you could start out at 6 years old, 7 years old, and I was like, oh my gosh. So I looked into it, and I'm like, there's quite a few tracks here in Florida, and we were pretty close. We were within distance of Georgia, Jasper, whatever, and eventually they ended up putting a track at East Bay Raceway inside the big track.
Was it inside the car track?
Right, the car track. And that's another thing that we did. We were drawn to going there on Saturday nights, watching, the open wheel modified and stuff like that. And we started to enjoy walking through the pits. But anyways, so I started looking into, there was tracks, and like the biggest key was, okay, you've got a cart, you got a track, this is what they are, this is what you need, but I have no idea what I'm doing, and later on we find out it is very competitive and there's a lot to know. or learn. And
So we went to Dirt Devil. I think was the first track that we ended up trying. I say trying out is we didn't have a cart, we didn't have nothing. We haven't bought
right,
it.
I said, hey, let's go look at it.
Mm-hmm.
And in the meantime, I met Henry Albritton, who was maybe 30 minutes away, one of the biggest cart distribution guys. And like everything else, the people that have raced, you trust people and you have bonds with people. And Henry was unbelievable because, I mean, I wanted the best. I wanted to learn now. I wanted us to be competitive right out of the gate. And he said, well, we'll slow down, slow down. A lot of money, a lot of investment, a lot of time. He says, why don't you go check one out and see how you like it? And I talked to you about it, but, you know, without visually seeing it.
Well, I didn't know nothing about it. Like I said, I wasn't born around racing, so racing wasn't involved. So you approached me about going to see this kart track, which going somewhere about racing I thought would be fun, but I had no idea what we were getting into.
So the first track we ever went to was in San Antonio, Florida, up around Ocala. And it was actually owned by Eric Amarello's grandfather. Do you remember that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And we sat in the stands. I remember showing up and I'm like, whoa, look at all this clay. So I'm kind of thinking, okay, it's a dirt track, you know, knobby tires, etc. And they're running around on slicks like a dragster. I mean, slicks. And I tell you, I mean, just the smell, the party atmosphere with all the tents and trailers and everybody, and it was all young people. And what was nice about it, that they had classes for every age. Mm-hmm. So there was a lot of fathers and sons racing, or you know, their son or their dads started out, and it ended up being passed down. Well, everybody had an edge on us. It seemed like we were the define of rookies.
It kind of felt like we were bringing the yard cart to compete against the race carts, because that's the other thing is with dirt racing is where we started, and we thought of knobby tires and everything like that, like you said. And with these slicks, we're okay. What are they gonna do? We're used to late models. What are they gonna do? Buzz around the top side, back steer, and these things stuck.
And that was what was so impressive. I'm like, these things are flying. You know, back then it was a 6.5 horse Brigden Stratton. It was, like I said, 6.5 horsepower, but it was actually probably putting out 9 to 11. And they had little dynos for these things. I mean, just the money was unbelievable. Not like it is now. But to see these cars, how fast they were and stick was just truly phenomenal.
Yeah, and watching all these young kids, I know when I first, well, I guess we'll get into that. So we had a good time. Actually, we had an amazing time to realize that there was something like that experience that close to home was just
that you could do it. All the pieces to the puzzle was there. Yeah. But like everything else in racing comes down to money. You know, I mean, I seriously remember being there an hour and looking at you and said, what would you think about doing something like this?
Yeah.
And we were just, this is, oh man.
Yeah.
You have your own team. I mean, what was really cool about it, and that's why I like doing this, because it's walking down memory lane. Just like when you talk to Charles Head. Listen to the memories, because that's what you're making these days. No matter what you're doing for these hobbies, most of the people that are doing hobbies learned from their parents, or their parents did it, or they picked it up and they're showing their kids how to do it. And there's so much out there now that you can, but talk about the ultimate, and at the time I didn't know, the ultimate experience of being with your son. Mm-hmm. You know, because I'm like, hey, yeah, we get to come to the track and race around and go home. Well, that's the fun part. Like I said, the good, bad, and ugly.
Yeah.
You know, so right off the bat, you know, I went back to Henry. I said, we're in. This is really neat. He says, okay, do you have a cart in mind? No.
What's a car? There's different ones?
Yeah, there's different ones, and boy, they look goofy. And he says, okay, so how big's your trailer? And I was like, trailer? They're like, yeah. Do you have something to pull it? Yeah, that I got, And it was just funny because I was like, yep, give me the top of the line cart, engine, tires, everything. Let's go. And
did you imagine at that time how much, if you say I want the top of the line stuff, of what money you're going to be putting into?
Yeah, it was amazing. And, like I said, there's about 4 people in our racing career, and I guess you can call it a career that you've been in. We were in it, almost 20 years, and Henry was one of them.
Oh, yeah.
And without him, none of this would be possible, because with that kind of money, you have to put your trust in somebody. Racing is a family, but let's face it, we're all out there competing.
Yeah. So
as we learned, nobody's going to go out there and tell us all the secrets right off the bat, And so anyways, so he recommended an older cart at the time, and it was pretty what you would call race ready. Not a whole lot you had to do with it, and he showed me how to tighten the chain, put the tires on, and gas. And that was about it. It really was. And he said, you guys are going to learn together. And at the time you were 7 years old. And I'm, I remember.
And these carts aren't doing, like even the Pocket Rocket was tapped out at like
20.
Yeah, 20 miles an hour, maybe 30. And these carts are easily doing 35, 40 miles an hour.
Yeah.
At the kid level.
At kid level.
At kid
right,
level
yeah.
are doing that amount.
And, we take it, you kind of think about it, you're like, oh, they're just driving. A 7-year-old knows nothing about driving, except for maybe Power Wheels or something like that goes 5 miles an hour. So,
not to mention, you're not in a open space like your backyard, front yard. You're on a closed track, to a point, closed track against other competitors.
Very small track as far as width-wise. You might be able to, some tracks are different than others, but 2 is probably the safest you can get. So here we are. We're going to go 30, 35 miles an hour, 2 wide, maybe 12 carts, a bunch of 7-year-olds running around a track. And I remember.
But let me ask you this before you jump to that. So the very first experience we had in getting in a cart, that's always one we talk about and to remember. If you had to put our first experience, again, we were lucky enough that there was another track. We raced at mainly 2, Dirt Devil and East Bay, but there was a third track called Lakeland.
Lakeland, yes, home of Joe Nemechek.
So he was that was a track that did practices on Tuesdays or something?
Tuesdays, yeah. It was the only track that practiced at the time. So, Henry said, hey, listen, get up there. It was Tuesday, like you said. Get up there, get some practice in, because we're racing Saturday. Yeah.
So what if you could describe, and we'll get into it, but if you can describe that night in one word, how would you say? What would you call it?
Absolutely terrifying.
That's 3, but that's
terrifying.
Yeah. So I know I'll let you explain your side. So me getting in the cart, obviously know nothing about it, and it's got an engine, like it's got a lot of power, got a lot of speed. I ended up doing, it's just practice. I knew nothing about it, but basically putting around, make sure I can hold a steering wheel, make sure I can hold the gas, make sure I can stop, all the basics. But everything goes well, and we're good to go.
Well, I remember. Let's go back even further. So we show up. We have no trailer, so we have to rent a U-Haul. And when I say U-Haul, it's one that barely fits this, 4-foot cart. So here we show up with a U-Haul, and it might as well had lights on it and sirens and everything like that, because nobody else did. Everybody had real trailers, and here we are showing up. I mean, if they could have put rookie on a sticker on your cart. We didn't even, if you remember, know how to get on the track.
Oh, yeah.
How to get on. They're like, oh, yeah, you go over there to the staging area. What? staging area. I was like, okay. So this guy was nice enough. He was like the flag man on the ground, and he came over and said, all right, here's where you're going to set up. When they call your class or whatever, they'll let you know, and you just go out and you run around and, just be careful. Don't overdo it. But when you go off, there is on the back stretch, I think it was coming out of 4, is the exit row or exit lane, whatever. And that's where you come off. That way there's no problems. Here's where you go on, here's where you go off. And I'm like, sounds good. And this is where Mom actually came with us, because I think she was kind of leery about what it is that we were about ready to do. A 7-year-old getting in this, you're picturing like a motorcycle, so to speak, that it was something fast, like a car. And so your very first time out, I think you came in where you came off. And that's where they explained it again.
Oh, I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah, they were like, dude, you can't. This is not.
Yeah. And they said, no, it's going. They pointed and just said, yeah, it's going around the back stretch.
Yeah, you look like a salmon coming upstream with everybody going out. And it, that freaked people out. And we're just like, oh my gosh. No prep on our tires, which anybody that's ever kart raced or run any type of dirt racing knows that prep and all that other stuff. So we had no prep on. It was late in the season, because I remember the season had already started. It was probably first part of September. And so it had those hot days and cool nights. And that caused for moisture, and that's what I'm leading up to. So it was neat when you went out there the first time. We're all excited. I'm checking what little I can to make sure everything's running. I'm checking the gas. I'm thinking that maybe you used a lot. No, those engines don't use anything. So Mom helps me take the cart off the cart buggy, which hauls it around. And that's a whole nother story, just for the fact of how light you were and the amount you had to weigh. But so we put you on the grid, and it was your time to go out, and you were getting better and buzzing around. And, like you said, they pointed to where you exit. I didn't see it. I didn't walk the track. So you basically, everybody was getting off the track. You did another lap by yourself because you were in the back. So, and you really didn't know what the flags meant or whatever, so you went around.
That's what I think that kind of made it worse that you're getting ready to lead into is I went another lap because I wasn't really sure what to do. But by the time I came around, pretty much everybody was off the track.
Yeah, and they're saying, get off, because you're out there just buzzing around by yourself. And like I said, you were getting better at it, so the speed had picked up a lot. And now they're waving a flag at a 7-year-old to get off the track, and you totally exited early from the pit exit.
Well, exit late, because the pit exit on late.
No, it was early because you came off. You went down the backstretch. You went into 3, and that's what it was. It's
originally was coming off. How they had it set up was you come off turn 3, and it ran against the fence
right, that's
all the
what
way
it was.
around.
So you saw.
They kept telling me 4, get off 4, get off
right.
4. So I was like, all right. So when I went around, I kind of went around or missed that exit because I was like, okay, it's at 4. When I went off 4, straight grass, not even just dry grass, wet grass.
Moist grass, and with slick tires. You'd have thought, I swear you went twice as fast when you hit the grass. So like you said, it went down. When you went off the track, you went down. And your mom and I, we totally couldn't see you then. And we just hear people screaming, because you were flying.
Yeah.
And, gas and brake still wasn't, all that. And people are screaming and running. And I'm not really thinking that something happened to you. I can't see you. And I'm thinking, okay, he went off, off the track. He's done. And he might have hit something or whatever, or stuck. And I remember going over there, and they said that you came to an abrupt stop. I'm talking 40 to 0 in 2 seconds. And luckily, you went underneath it was like a galvanized fence. You went underneath it, and it was almost like the end of a drag strip with the netting that catches you. Luckily, you didn't hit a pole. I mean, there's only, 8 feet in between those things, and you perfectly went underneath it, but you were trapped. Couldn't get out. I show up. Mom's like, oh my gosh. And like anything else, our racing, first thing I'm worried about is, he looks like he's okay. He's moving around or whatever. But the cart was trashed.
But the big thing on that one is they're at their fiberglass bodies, or was that one plastic?
No, it was fiberglass.
Okay.
Yeah.
So either way, it did a lot of damage.
No, that might have been plastic because it actually had zip ties that looked like football strings.
That's what I thought.
That were holding it on. Yeah, that was because that was still back then. They really hadn't gone to all fiberglass or what it was. But all I'm thinking of, we got a race Saturday, and you name it. I mean, literally, I thought the cart was destroyed 'cause I don't know anything about it. The Nerf bars took most of the damage, but you did mess up the rear axle.
So that was the very first time going through the night. So the first time we raced or I shouldn't say the first time we raced. How far into racing did it become? Let me backtrack a little bit. So when you talked about to all Britons about, hey, I want the best of the best of the best, he said, don't do that. He goes, get them in started, get them in just a cart, get them to drive around the track, which is the smart thing to do.
Yeah, think about it. If we would have had the best of the best.
Oh, I would have destroyed it. And
it would,
good.
yeah. So
at what point in time did it become, okay, we're at that point, now let's get some new equipment.
We ran that cart the end of that end of that year and one more year. Matter of fact, I take that back. The end of that year, we stayed with that cart, and then Henry told us of a guy that had a little bit newer carts. And I remember taking it home, cleaning it up, and getting it repowder coated, and at least we had a cart that was in the same century as we were.
Because I think the last one, if I'm not mistaken, we started in 98.
Yeah.
I think was the first time. And that was considered, I think, a 93.
Yeah.
I think that's about right.
Well, what's funny, too, is even today, people that race anything, bikes, mountain bikes, or there's name brands to everything.
Yeah.
And, there was, at that time, probably 3 or 4 different chassis builders. And I didn't know a Phantom from ultralight to whatever. And so he gave us this Phantom chassis. We did the best we could, but I kind of went overboard and bought a really nice body. And I remember we decorated it almost like Dale Jr.'s, and we got you a suit.
The red suit.
Yeah, the red suit. You look totally, and that's what we've done.
So at the end of the first, it was just basically we finished up the year, and then at that point you said, okay, it's time to get better equipment.
Yeah, better equipment because the juices start flowing. As far as being competitive, you're getting better. You really enjoy it. All right, so if we're gonna put the time and effort into it, let's put some money into it so we're not getting beat on.
Correct.
On
and I want to get into money into it because I think that's a big factor in all racing that is really very controversial. Because if you had one thing, if you're like, hey, if you had all the money in the world and no knowledge, or you had all the knowledge in the world and no money, which one would you choose? And everybody would be like, oh, all money or all knowledge or what? Because it's the same thing. Is if you're new to it, money can buy knowledge, as in somebody to help you out, the best stuff. Right. If you have all the knowledge in the world, you can skimp out because you can make things work. But for us, we were starting fresh.
Right. So the only thing we could do
is throw money.
Is money to try to get at least we have a cart that's great, and we have new tires and stuff like that.
So how do you get trained for it? So I know there's a lot into it, but I'm so
the bad part about racing is it's so expensive. We talked about practicing on that Tuesday. That's so rare. because it's not like an asphalt track where you just go out and you run. The track has to be prepped, and it takes a lot of machinery, time. So no one really has practice.
Yeah.
And so you're learning you're learning on the fly, so to speak, and your practice is when you go out and practice before your heats. All racing is like that. You really can't go somewhere and say, hey, let's go practice.
Yeah.
There's nothing that simulates that type of racing. So,
But you did had Albritton. So Albritton was the one that really got us set up. He's the one that got us scaled.
Right.
Hey, put this weight here, put this weight here. This is what cross
oh
does.
yeah, there's so much to your kart working,
So we learned a lot of it from
right,
him
and a lot
originally.
of it, even though we're in this little cart, it's the same fundamentals that goes into all types of racing. We're doing this. We're trying to accomplish the same thing that a NASCAR guy is: wedge, tire pressures, and that's the physical part of the cart. And then there's the part of the driver learning the track. Yeah, that you go to the same track every week, but and the configuration's the same, but the way that they prep it, you may run low, may run high. When it's wet, you're down at the bottom. When it's dry, it all depends. And the knowledge has to come really fast.
Well, I know you bought as many books as you can get in the cart, and then between all the books and reading and
living at all Britons with all the work we had done, and we didn't have scales,
and he came to the track too. So any questions we had,
right? Yeah.
So we were a lot of the things we were learning was pretty much on the fly with somebody. It wasn't like anything we can go to school for. Because first of all, there's no school for. What's funny is later on, we get into cars and late models, and we kind of jump from carts to late models. But there actually is classes and schools for that. In carts, there was none. You really had to learn everything, like you said, on the fly.
Right, and going back to money, as far as setting your cart up. So my knowledge, money, but the ultimate, no matter what, all that meant. It still came down to a 7 or 8 year old driving around the track.
Yeah.
So, trying to explain to a 7 or 8 year old who's never driven a car, trying to tell them what a push is or what's loose and here's where you need to enter and how to work your throttle, brake, that's foreign language to you, just like trying to set a cart up for me. And I would go out there and I would, what's funny is you talk about our racing was practice. You'd come off the track and we'd say, okay, let's pretend this was practice. What'd you learn? Da, da, da. And here I am not getting a lot of info from you because you didn't know how to explain it, terminology or whatever it is. So
it's the blind walking the blind,
right?
Yeah. I didn't know much about it. You didn't know much about it, and we just learned as we went. So you're trying to get info from me, and I'm trying to get info from you, and we don't have enough info to do what we need.
Right. So I've never been in a go-kart like that, so I'm even further in left field, and I'm trying to adjust according to what I'm seeing, and you'll go into a turn, and the back end comes out. And I'm like, oh, okay, he's loose. Let me tighten it up. Well, here I am thinking, and I am tightening the car up, but it's actually backwards of what you're doing. The reason the cart was loose is because you went in and you snapped it, because it wouldn't turn. It was too tight. So you were making the rear end come out, and I'm trying to tighten up, and it's making it worse. So oversteer, understeer, all that stuff was... It just, it wasn't there enough where you could say, hey, this is what it is. It's loose.
Yeah.
You
I know the big thing that we kind of ran into is whenever So I was young. So being that no matter how much experience you had in racing, you were still the dad. You were still the guy that you had to still train me, and I still didn't know what I was doing. But I know how many times, and we used to butt heads so many times on, you need to do this. I am doing this. No, you're not. Yes, I am. And it kept going back and forth when in a big aspect of it, and something that I didn't know, something you didn't know, is I couldn't this item, let's say trying to turn, I need to stay low coming off of 2. I'm trying to, I can't. Yes, you can. Well, I couldn't, but I couldn't tell you why. It's just I couldn't do it. Where it was more of, if I would have entered a different way, it probably could have fixed the exit. But it's one of those things that we were both didn't have enough info.
Yeah, you're just looking at going down to the end of the track and turning left.
Correct. And it was something.
And keeping it on the track without hurting somebody else or yourself. So it was extremely difficult through all of that, actually. I mean, we raced karts for 7 years, I think?
Something like that,
7 years. And we had just started to get very good at it. And
Well, because that's the other thing is I wanted to get into is competition. So it is kind of like a version, I would say, maybe gymnastics, that you have your team that you work with together, you train for, and then you compete against other teams. And technically you can compete against another teammate and that kind of thing, where in racing, you have your team, have your car, have your setup. But there's still competitions. You still have you have your home guys, your local track racers, your local guys. But then when a big group comes into town, like FKA, WK, and stuff like that.
yeah, big sponsor events. Right.
Yes, you realize how far off you are. Like,
Right,
yeah,
yeah.
I'm.
And we're still at one track.
Yeah,
You know, we weren't going to leave that track until
we figure
we
out.
were able to race decently on it. You know, why go to another track if you can't take care of this one?
Yeah,
And I remember the awe factor the first time we were in a World Karting Association event,
yeah.
you know, that our track was sponsoring, you know, and wow, you know, here comes these 30-foot haulers for a go-kart. This is stuff that you see at East Bay on a
Yeah.
Saturday night, you know, with hauling race cars. And these kids are pulling out 2 and 3 carts. But I
72
tell you what, the
tires.
biggest thing I remember, just amazement, was seeing like 50, 60 tires.
That's what I was gonna say next. And so that's the big thing that I would say is what did we learn from the beginning compared to the end? What drastic changes we made? And that's one of the big things is those big. You don't need. This is what some people say. You don't need all them tires to win. You don't need all them chassis to win. You just need the right setup and the right this and right that. And that's the thing about it is we've realized. I know we had our own. We used to bring 2 sets to the track, and that was basically it. 1 set to run when we clean
Yeah,
and
it was
run.
practice and our good tires.
Yeah, our good tires. And then when it came to the more bigger races, or when we started getting on in the years, that now we came there with a huge box of probably about 10 to 12 sets of tires.
Sets, yeah. I mean, it was like a Lowe's, one of those boxes, one of them plastic ones that you would put all your garden tools in,
Yeah.
or something like that. And I remember mounting PVC pipes and 4 to a
in a-
rack,
yep.
and because that was tires, you don't have suspension in kart racing, so to speak. So your tire pressures and stuff like that is that.
I remember when we used to set the tires, I think we used to set them. This is when we were practicing and back in day one. It was about like 8 psi or 10 psi all the way around. And then it was, well, you have a left side, right side. Now you got to a point that it was 4 different tire pressures, one for each corner, and then the tire was prepped a certain way for each corner,
Right.
front, back.
Yeah, and only the 2 back tires were the same size. You know, so you had a different.
Oh no, both right sides. We haven't done kart racing in a while.
Yeah, both right sides. Yeah, were 11 inches, and you had this little small one in the front left. But the only way you could work a cart was you could loosen the car up with tire pressures so they wouldn't turn as fast, or you could put more in, give you less of a tire patch or footprint, and make the cart faster. But you know, all this stuff we didn't even know about. But we learned as we went along and took our lumps. But
How many years into it did it take? So you bought that tire gauge, the temperature one, and you bought that in the go-kart
yeah,
race. How many years into it would you say did you buy that? And that was
I
a big deal because
yeah, I would say into about the fourth year, because you could tell how the tire's working by the temperature on the outside wall, the middle of the tire, and the inside.
Mhm.
I mean, just blown away at how intricate this was.
Yeah.
And lo and behold, it was only scratching the surface of what later to come when we started racing stock cars.
Well,
But
that's the big thing is, and it's a lot worse now for go kart racing. I can't believe I did. So I did cars for a while, which we'll get into on another episode. But I did cars for a while. When I quit doing cars, I wanted to do something for myself. We split up, as in he started doing his thing. When you're in racing, you don't have a life for the most part. So we kind of split up, and I wanted to do my own thing. So I started kart racing again. And the amount of time it takes to be competitive to winning in a kart nowadays, I still think is way worse than it was before. But even back then, the different types of prep to get these tires where they want them to be. You had like a beginning prep, an ending prep, a setup prep, a day prep. Like you might as well have superhuman powers.
right, and then they had all these ingredients, WD-40 and creosote, and I mean, some of these things it wasn't even legal to have in your garage.
Yeah.
And I mean, and it's so funny. Someone could tell you to you pee on your tire and it'll make it go faster. Matter of fact, the funniest thing is it was called goat pee. It stunk. I think that's maybe why they called it. But you were trying to gum up these tires to make it stick. I mean, it was just the philosophy was so crazy. I got a slick tire and we're going to try to make it stick on dirt. And it just never comprehend. I'm like, you know what? If you put knobbies on this, we can solve everything,
The funny part about it is we did all this. We did the prep and even the time, like you prep the tire for the whole week to get it soft, to get it right where you want it to be, to get it gummy. And then you did that special prep right before you went out. So you got it all nice and clean, got it nice and hot.
We even went to... it looked like our go-kart was under heating blankets.
Yeah,
we had individual. I remember I had one of those I call them zip strips, where you could put multiple plugs in.
Yeah,
and it was mounted to the cart buggy that carries the cart to the grid, and it had its own blanket for each tire. It literally wrapped around it like Velcro, and you turned it on, and it heated the tires up.
Yep.
And you unplugged them, and you went to the
the funny
grid
part
with
is
them.
you dropped it, and then you have these tires are pristine, they're clean, they're perfect, looks like IndyCar tires. And then what do?
The
all
grid,
over the dirt.
The grid is so dirty. You make one lap and they look, it's like you kind of think to yourself, wow, but I guess what it is when you start to run, the friction of the tire heats up, which heats the chemicals up and it does the tire. But it's so crazy. And then, and then here you are, you're washing tires right after you come off the track. You're washing tires. So we have this huge bucket of water. And that was like the biggest thing in the world. When you get to the track, fill the bucket. And you had to sponge these down, wash the cart, none of this stuff. Yeah, the dirt was big on the tires, but to wash the cart and all that other stuff was just some stuff you did. It was so crazy, but it was true. You said, you don't have a life. And I talked about it earlier, the amount of time. I don't know. I could tell you we wouldn't have got into karting had we known, the time, the effort, the money.
Well, and that's the thing about it is that any racer will tell you, well, all the ones that I know, that you're right. If you told us the time, effort, money, all that's invested in it before we get there, we would have never done it. It would have been an easy no. Like, no, I'll go buy a football and go play football.
Yeah,
I'll get beat up. But what's funny is you don't tell us. We get to the track. We do the whole experience, and you win. the experience of winning, what you went through to get that win, it's like a major adrenaline that you gotta. It's like drugs. You gotta.
That's what keeps you coming back. You
Yeah.
know, they say it's like, I'm not a big golfer. I love to golf, but it's like you have the crappiest round, but that one shot, and it keeps you coming back. Same thing with fishing, a lot of these hobbies that keep you back and keep you driven. And that's what makes it a hobby. You got to sacrifice a little here and there to do this, but it's what gravitates you to your hobby.
Yeah.
And that's why you're like enthusiastic about it. And if you're putting a lot of money and time into it, then it really becomes a little more serious than a hobby,
So winning, what would your thoughts on winning then compared to now? I know, again, we haven't been in racing. I think 2006 was when we started cars. So 2006 was that. So realize it's 2020. So that was 14 years ago when we touched karts. But what do you think of
14 years ago and you were 14?
Yeah. Oh my goodness.
That's even worse. Oh,
being as young as I was, but back then you could get people racing at 3. Now it wasn't racing; it was just putting them in a carts, getting them to understand them, the fundamentals of gas brake.
Tony carts or the kid carts.
Correct. So once you get up to that age of 6, 7, then you really start competing. But what's your thoughts are winning then compared to winning now? Do you think the guys that won back then, if they were doing the exact same thing now, could win?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, as far as think about winning, as far as if we would have had the same knowledge, I think your driving ability, you'd have been better than them. We going up through the ranks of karting, and they have different classes as you go up, and it's based usually on age. And it's the restrictor plate that you have in your engine that determines a lot of that. But I just...
My thing about it is where I say no is because when I got back into the karts and realized what people were putting into the time, the effort, the chemicals, the components, like my problem would be is where racing has gone. I love racing if everybody had the same exact kart, which was crazy as all these specifications, these rules that they have is supposed to help with this issue, but it feels like you can't put enough rules on them. But I feel like that nowadays, like example is when I got into racing or back into racing and I started prepping my tires. I had one set of tires I prepped. I already knew that was bad, but I was like, I'll make these work. I just want to go out there and have fun. These guys were showing up with machines that you put the tires on to inject the chemicals into it and
needling
and automatically soaking them, siping the tires like all on. And they brought those to the track. Not to mention they brought 2 or 3 engines. Not to mention they brought 2 or 3 karts, which we did, which we'll get into. We had 2 karts. We started going to East Bay. Probably my 3rd year, I think we started going to East Bay Raceway.
We got into 2 karts because when we were competing at that time at a higher level with WKA and FKA and all that, you competed in what they called heavy and light.
Oh, I did gold and blue, I believe.
Well, and you also did, gold and blue because you were at that age where you could do both, but having 2 karts also meant heavy and light.
Okay.
So moving weight around on a cart isn't really good because it's scaled for them to be where they're at. If he had to put 20, 30 pounds on, it was difficult.
That's right, because I forgot in go-karting, which is kind of cool, unlike to a point. Cars, they race 7 classes a night, sometimes 9, sometimes 4, but average about 7 classes a night for cars. For karts, there's like 15, 20 different classes. And it wasn't uncommon. If anything, it was a regular thing to race more than one class.
Oh, and then there was people that also had the cage go-karts, the champs. I forget, what did they call our karts?
Well, I think flat carts.
Flat
I think of
carts,
flat
yeah,
carts,
flat carts,
and they
yeah.
ran the champs. I never got to run champs. I heard that was a little bit different because they were just that little bit higher off the ground, so they were a little harder to control. But you had your champ classes, which were light and heavies and gold, blues, and purples, and all that.
It
kind
was.
of stuff.
It looked just like a regular cart, but it had a, so to speak, a roll
Correct.
cage on
So
it. Yeah.
so that's right. We were running 2 classes a night at 2 different tracks just to get everything we can out of the night. Obviously, with 2 carts, it's double the work. But now I want to get to yours. So we went again. We were not involved in racing this whole time, or not involved in racing at all up to that point.
Prior to it, yeah.
Prior to it, we got me into racing. You learning about racing, and I kept saying, "Come on, join me, join me, join me." And I still wish you could have done more racing, but you did do, I think, a year and a half, of solid racing. I was at that 6-7 year mark. What finally was the kicker? What?
Well, I wanted to make sure you had everything, the best of everything. You had 2 carts, we had 3 engines, all the tires in the world, a beautiful trailer, and once you had everything and you were old enough to start to work on your own cart in between races, because let's face it, I can't race and crew chief.
Oh, I still remember before
Because I get competitive and I want my cart to be good, so I may not
Yeah.
put all of that into your cart.
Yeah, so that's I want to get into that because that's a funny story. So I did as much as I can for years. I even think to almost my last racing days, I still struggled to pick up my cart because I was a very small guy, anyways. But when it come to working on my cart, only about the 3-4 year mark did I start really working on my cart, and sometimes by myself. And I still remember when you used to go, Ken, you were in the Air Force. You were in the Air Force all the way up to my halfway into, no, I guess all of my car career.
I retired in 13.
Yeah, so all of my car career. So you were there, you were working the whole time, but you had to travel. You were going to Japan and overseas and all that kind of stuff. And I remember, all right, guys, I'm going to be gone for the weekend. So it's going to be you and your mom have to take the cart to the track, get prepped, get set up. Good luck, and call me.
And what was funny about that, it's not like, most people might think, well, take the week off. Well, you can't take the week off because you're in a points championship.
Yep.
You're running for points. So I said, usually I can manipulate my schedule or when I'm going, coming, all that stuff. And I was like, you're on your own. I was praying for rain. That it don't take much rain to cancel a dirt track karting event. But anyways, yeah. So it was you and your mom.
Yeah, and I remember she did everything she can, but it's crazy because I guess at that time I was 10 years old, maybe 9 or 10 years old, and I'm having to tell my mom, all right, this is what we need to do. Are you sure? Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, tell mom to wash a tire. You don't know what you're going to get.
Shoot. And then, not to mention, we still had to do somewhat setup ideas. So you kind of gave mom/me ideas, and if you're having this kind of problem, but
if it's loose or tight,
just some simple stuff,
right?
Simple stuff. And I do remember getting your phone call. I think you were overseas, so we got your phone call for a little bit, so we got to talk, throw some ideas, and I just remember that whole experience. And we had to do that, I think, 2 or 3 times.
We'll talk about phone calls and racing also later.
Oh yeah, I got that on the list. So we did about 2 or 3 times, but we never won. But we did come close. I think we ended up, a 3rd and 2 seconds. We did good. We were really happy with our results, but we still didn't win. But I think we got 2 seconds out of it. In the years of doing it, I think only 3 times that you weren't there, and I think we did pretty well, but we didn't win. But the experience trying to run it by myself was pretty crazy. But to go back to, so you're starting. So now I'm trying to do it by myself, and I'm able to do it.
Right. For the most part, you're washing tires, maybe changing gears, which is just, sliding the chain off and putting the correct gear on, tightening it up, and off you go. So it made it a little bit easier. And you know what? Here I am doing all this work. You talk about being in the military, and then you talked about refereeing, and I did side jobs like crazy because that's what supported it. Family does not support racing as far as money goes.
Not in go-kart racing.
Yeah, not in go-kart
Shoot.
racing.
Now, and I will say this, that in the styles we did, the local tracks, there's no money. It's a straight money pit. It's all about the hobby, the experience, the fun. When you do the big races, it's only a payout really if you win, and that's if it's a big money race. Because,
Yeah, you get a trophy. You put all this money, time, and effort. A set of tires back then was $200. And what was really crazy, you get a brand new set of tires and you cut them down.
Yes.
Yeah, they have little holes on them that tell you the depth of them.
Yep.
And somebody in their genius said that if you take more rubber off, the better it is. Well, to me, the thicker the rubber, the more friction, the hotter the tire gets. So here you are cutting down a tire and you're trying to make it last, you know, and, you know, it's not going to. But anyway, so putting all that into it, I got competitive.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah, but you were a big dude. You were
I raced
super heavy.
Yeah.
So they had their lights, then they had their, I think they call it masters. I'm not sure. I know in asphalt they call it masters, but it was a regular class. Then you had your heavies. Then you had your super heavies, and the super heavy weight was you were still 50 pounds over.
Yeah, I didn't have any lead on my cart.
And you were still.
I had to put my seat in the most advantageous part to make the cross weight that I needed. Yeah, I couldn't afford to put. And then again on you probably weighed 60 pounds and your cart and lead weighed close to 240.
Oh yeah, that's what was funny is I could help you.
Yeah, you were like 310 and 340 for light and heavy.
I can help you get your cart off the trailer, off the cart, but I couldn't help me get up my. I had to have somebody help.
Nowadays, not back then. Nowadays they have buggies with
the
remotes on them. You just kind of just put them on there and they jack. You don't even put them on. It just goes underneath and jacks it up. And it's just, I'm like, wow.
So what back then? Well, I want to finish up with yours. So you ran that for a while. You competed. You won. It's crazy because I don't think I won one race at the Dirt Devil track, which is the track that I grew up at, and I only won one race. It was always second, third, second.
Yeah.
We won a lot more. We were very, very dominant at East Bay. It's funny because I did win. I won 2 championships there. One of the championships we tied for the championship points, and I won on a pill draw.
On a pill draw.
Because they had to put.
There's no overtime or extra innings or anything like that. They literally had the same points at the end of the night. And
for a whole year worth of points, and at the end of the night, I won a championship by a pill draw. So we were very dominant in East Bay. I wasn't as good at Dirt Devil, but you won how many races at Dirt Devil?
I ran quite a few. I really enjoyed it. It was so funny because you had raced there 3 or 4 years and had never won, and my first time there, I think I won, but I didn't know how to race. I know how to set up a cart. Well, as big as I am, I'm taking up the whole road.
Well, and that's the thing. In go-kart racing, you do heat races. You pull a spot, you start a heat race, and that's it. Where in cars, or most cars, not all of them, but you qualify. But there's no qualifying in karts. You pull where you start, and you got to move up the field. So
which is kind of like most of the cars. Only the exception of the late models actually have.
Well, they've came around since then. There is more qualifying now, but again in karts, you got what you got, but you kept getting up front.
Yeah, I did. Right. Yeah. And it was fun. Oh, but it did help us out. You know, by me racing, you know, I remember the first time coming off the track, and I don't even think I practiced. My first race was, you know, warm-ups. My first time going out was in warm-ups. And then it was what do you call qualifying? Group qualifying, all that stuff. And we had a great time. We were a bunch of big guys, and we laughed, you know, and stuff like that, and had a great time. But I remember coming off the track after my first race saying, oh my gosh, I did not know it was like this. I am so sorry for anything I've ever said or done. It was so amazing. You know, it's easy to say, hey, you know, swing like this to hit a ball and do that, step here. But to actually physically do something like that was I was exhausted. Exhausted. I mean, people are like, yeah, what are you talking about? Okay, well, these don't have power steering or suspension,
The
and
G's,
the G-force laterally is absolutely incredible. And, people don't realize it, but, the sport part of it is also the mental part. You know, every second that you're on that cart, you have to be in a certain position to turn well, to pass well, to block, to do whatever. So it must, I don't know, maybe 12, 13 seconds go around in a go-kart, and you're constantly and you don't have rear view mirrors.
Nope.
So you're going by a lot of feel. Somebody bumping you, hitting you. Sometimes you can hear the cart behind you.
Well, and that's the thing. What I know now, if the knowledge I have now from the racing that I've done, if I was where I was back then with the knowledge I have now, it'd be huge difference.
And that's what we were competing against. A lot of the dads that we were competing against, they were former drivers at some level.
Oh, yeah.
So when you came to set up all this, high-tech wedge and laser straightening and, I mean, just all this stuff, they were so far ahead of us.
Yeah.
And that's why I've to say that, anybody can drive, but not everybody can race. And that's where you came in, and you were competitive because you had what it took to drive. And once you started to feel the cart from your seat instead of your head, your mind, it just became natural. And I think that's what actually, your competitiveness and drive, because, we haven't even touched on what happens Monday through Friday.
Yeah.
We're out there till gosh only knows how long, working tires, changing tires, off of rims, on rims, changing oil. I mean, the list goes on and on and on, especially if you did get any damage from a race, change a spindle that got bent or whatever it might be. So the time that you're putting in, back to what you're talking about, the victory.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's short-lived. It's wonderful. It what keeps you back and the drive, and it what keeps you going through the week.
Yeah.
And there's so much time, so much stuff we gave up. I literally, thank God that Mom had her activity with Adrian and travel volleyball. I mean, let's face it, we couldn't have done this if they didn't have something.
No, no way. And that's the thing that we had something going on. They had something going on. They came to some of my events. We came to some of theirs. We made it a family thing. But man,
they were into volleyball as big as we were karting.
Correct.
Because they traveled, stayed in hotels, played Junior Olympics, went to different states. Yep. So it was great, because we could talk to each other and, hey, what did you do? How was it? And we had stories to tell each other because, something that I want everybody to know, that if you haven't done this or if you have a hobby, that it's about making memories. Yeah, the money comes and goes, and, I'd do it all over again. Our relationship growing up was awesome. But that differentiate a dad from a crew chief kind of gets, gray area there because, you're out there and you're putting your money and your life and your whatever on there. I mean, you've had some horrific crashes, but it's just about putting it all together. And, the safety factor, we could talk about that forever as well.
Oh yeah, I mean we are, well, in go-karts it wasn't as bad. In cars it was pretty bad because in karts you did have to have your fire retardant suit, but it had to be level 1
And shoes.
and your shoe. Well,
Shoes, gloves,
in
helmet.
karts you don't have to have fire retardant gloves. You don't have to have fire retardant shoes.
Right,
You
but
don't,
they have to be at a certain level.
correct, but it didn't have to be fire retardant. But you still had to wear all this gear. Speaking of gear, another funny story. So one day my responsibility was make sure you have your stuff. Very simple. Just have your gear. That means helmet, that means neck brace, that means suit, that means gloves, that means shoes, everything like that. Just have your gear. Well, I showed up to the track with no racing suit. So, and you can't not race. It's not an option.
And
Like,
Mom has saved us a few times.
oh yeah. She's brought it to the track and stuff like that. But there was no other option. He goes, your options are one of two things. Either one, we just pack. We don't even unload. We just go home, enjoy the rest of the day, and no race.
Yeah, I think we were driving about 50 minutes to an hour one way.
Correct. Yeah. He goes, or you can go ask every driver if they have an extra suit. If you find one, then you're good to go. I was like, all right. So I went to driver to driver to driver. Not a lot of people had extra suits.
Well, let me paint the
around.
picture real quick.
Oh,
we're in Florida,
Florida,
and it's 104 degrees.
Literally.
Not on the track, just it's
Yeah.
104, humidity about 85 to 87%.
It literally was one of the hottest days in the summer. At 104, that's an actual number. And he said, go ask everybody. So I went from trailer to trailer to trailer, asking all these friends and everybody like that. Again, I'm 9 years old, but I screwed up, so I had to find the suit. I had one guy, and he goes, yeah, I got an extra one. It should fit you. We're about the same size. I'm like, oh, great. It was his winter suit. So it was like wearing a snow...
It was his kid's winter suit.
Winter suit. So it was like wearing a snow suit. Thick. So I'm look like the Michelin man, all black, not even white, all black.
And it
Michelin
was black. That's the thing that was just
so bad. And it was so hot that coming off of a heat race, I passed out, and you caught me, but I passed out because it was so hot.
Getting out of the cart.
Because of that gear. And that was one of the things. The gear was nice and obviously safety, and I've been in enough crashes that saved me. It wasn't me, but a buddy of mine, his throttle stuck, and he drove all around East Bay. I mean, the safety gear helps me. I've been through, like, in the very first race very first practice, when I went underneath the fence, I didn't feel a thing. So the safety gear is nice, but man, is it heavy and hot.
Right. But it's, let me tell you, we talked about spending money on this and that. And you had the best suit, the best tires. We even got you a Hans device, a version of the Hans device, which was actually better because it was put out by, who was that put it out? But it was actually more of a neck brace made out of carbon fiber.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah, than it was, the Hans device was more hooking your helmet up to your waist and all that other stuff. And you had, that was $700-800.
Oh yeah, that was, and that's the thing. The safety gear is super expensive. Even we technically could use.
It was a Hans device.
It was Hans.
Hans device. Yeah.
But that was in the car days, which was a huge help and definitely big, because in the go kart you can't. The Hans device is designed to hook over seatbelts, but in the karts, which we haven't talked about, there is no seatbelts.
The seat is formed to kind of keep you locked in. It's got really high sides on it where your ribs would be, kind of like in your car. It kind of hugs you. These are extended out pretty far. It takes a lot. That cart has to flip for you to even turn to come out, and I flipped and I didn't come out. So it's
but that's you flipped. So I wasn't around. When I say I wasn't around, is we were racing at the same time. So he was on the track, and I was a couple races, like 2 races after. So I'm getting my cart ready, and I hear in the crowd, "Ooh, okay, he's good." And I know nothing about it. I just know it's a big crash. I run to the fence and stuff like that. Everybody's driving like normal. I said, "What happened? What happened?" They said,
and you couldn't find.
No,
that's the first thing you do, because you can't always see somebody when you're watching.
Yeah,
and you just start looking for cars as they come by.
Yeah, and they're like, it's like, okay, everybody's on the track, and I was like, I see Dad. I said, okay, he's over there. I was like, what's going on? They said, your dad flipped. I was like, no, he's right there. He's fine. He's driving.
I get
around.
a 720 on my nose.
And what was funny about it is the steering wheel you cannot bend. You can take a big 10-pound hammer and beat the snot out of that steering wheel, and you might move it a millimeter. And you bent that thing like a taco.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, I remember because that was my heat race, and I wanted to race the feature, so I remember
Jumping. I remember you taking off and jumping up and down.
jumping up and down, trying to get this thing straight enough that I could use it for the feature, and yeah, that was crazy. But back to those Nerf bars, they're all designed for crushing and stuff like that. So the safety part of it, and I think that's why your mom was so comfortable with it, is first of all, she trusted me. Second of all, she saw, and if you get her involved and explain,
Yeah.
But
Oh, and those carts are safety enough. I remember we were racing around. I was leading the race. I had almost a half a track lead on the second place driver. It was a great night, and it was at Dirt Devil, which again I've only won there once, and it was at the end of my.
And up to that point, you still hadn't won.
No, that's what I said. I won my race at the end of my racing career, end of my karting career, and this was maybe my 5th year, something like that. And I'm leading by half track, and I just do something stupid. I go a little too high. I basically get out of my motion. And
You got off the groove.
Where it was a little dusty, all because I got lazy. I didn't focus. I was leading too much. I wasn't paying attention. It was totally my fault. But the right rear just hit a little bit of slick, spun me 180 degrees, and at probably about 45, 50 miles an hour, I back it into the flag stand. And so it went from 50, 0, pop. Didn't feel a thing. I actually drove back around and got back on the track before the guy even came around. But because I was the cause of the yellow flag, I got put to the rear, which I was so mad about that I started gesturing my hands up and down. And
what the heck?
Yeah,
why am I going to the rear?
Exactly, because I was still in the lead after this, and I'm throwing my hands up at a normal motion, as in I'm 9 years old. I don't know anything other than throw my hands up. What the crap?
Yeah, because you can't communicate. You can't talk to him. There's no radios, and he's up on the flag.
So this guy, one of the marshals, black flags me immediately and tells me to get off the track. So now I'm confused. Now I'm mad and confused at the same time. And I said, why? And he said, get off.
And my head's spinning because here you are with the biggest lead of your life and a track you've never won at.
Yeah.
And now you're black flagged.
And you have to get off the track. So I pull off the track, and I'm confused, and I don't even see you because I'm pulling off, and you're trying to figure out what's going on. And they tell him that I was flicking him off with my arm as an arm gesture, like a cross arm, and I was gesturing them F off, which was nowhere near it. And I said, he goes, the kid's 9 years old. How does he know anything?
He doesn't even know what that is.
Yeah, it was. Anyway, so they ended up losing that night, and it stunk, but we have those issues.
But what I was talking about before that I really want to get across is that all this, even our heated moments, and it as much as racing, I don't want to use the word hurt our relationship, put a strain on our relationship. The good times blew it away.
Yeah, it did.
Blew it away.
It's crazy as we always talk about our good times, especially if we're sitting down just chatting in a man cave like this. But we talk about it and we joke about it and we laugh about it and talk about all the good times we did have. At that moment, we're like, yeah, that was pretty good. But now that it's over and it's done with, it really was worth it. We would do it 10 times fold. That was the one thing I wanted to ask, which kind of lead into it sort of, is what do you know now that you wish you knew back then?
As far as knowledge, or as far as,
I guess both. That enjoy the time you have.
Yeah, I think it's so special because, like we've talked about, you don't win money. You might spend $300-400 on that week to get your cart ready and tires and everything. And I remember in the beginning when you got the novice plaque, the start of everybody gets a trophy type stuff.
Yep.
And all the way through. I mean, you don't win any money unless you're running a national race. I just wish I would have been a little bit more laid back, but that's not my style.
It's really hard for a Mullaney to do, is laid back. I say Mullaney in general is, I don't think I'd be, I don't know. I guess it's really hard for me to say I wish I knew this because of the knowledge I've learned. There's no way at 7 or 8 years old that I would have known this. But I guess it's something that I wish I would have paid it more attention. That at the moment, at the time, I was worried about obviously doing well. I wanted to win races. I wanted to be a superstar. I wanted to win all the trophies and all the money. And I was far from it. We did very well in go-karts, but I've seen people that I've raced cars with that have super exceeded what I did in karts. I did really well. I was proud of myself and still
But the
am.
main ingredient was they had somebody that knew
They had correct.
knew about racing.
They had a pedigree lined up.
Because that's what a lot of these people do around here. You know, we're in South Carolina now, and it's it's a hotbed for racing. Period. North Carolina, and that's all these kids are expected to do it. Here we are at a sport we know nothing about, and probably 99% of the country doesn't even know about kart racing. And
Yeah, most people when they think of kart racing, they think of like Frankie's or we raced the Grand Prix and things like that. And it's funny that I was at the time I was too young to race the Frankie's karts or to race the Grand Prix karts, which these karts maxed out at 15 miles an hour, and I was too young to race them. But yet on the weekends I was doing 45, 50 miles an hour in a go-kart. But yeah, that's only the biggest thing, and this is kind of another thing we haven't talked about, which is kind of funny, is the more you get competitive, the better you are, basically where I'm getting at. The better you are, the less people help you. You have your friends, you have your acquaintances, you have your allies, your teammates, and everything like that, which they're still going to be there. But by the end of the day, just like every other sport, is when that person you're training, the underdog, becomes better than you or competing against you, you can't really give them all your secrets. And I guess that's one thing I wish I knew back then or understood or got in a relationship. We had a good relationship with Albert and maybe stuck with that a little bit more. Maybe teamed up with somebody, basically learned from somebody because we didn't know. I think we spent a lot of time trying to do it ourselves because we wanted to do it ourselves. Everybody else was doing it ourselves. Why can't we do it ourselves? But they had a leg to stand on. So
yeah, we had so many. When you talk about rookie, this defines what a rookie is. I mean, I don't know what you could compare it to, because, if you get into a sport or a hobby or whatever, everybody's a rookie. Okay. But what we were doing as far as, they don't do that. 9-year-olds, 7-year-olds don't run cars. So the fact of being young is huge in that sport. Even if you know how to do everything to a kart, it still comes down to that 7-year-old, trying to explain like everything else. And that's where you have some of that problem that it's dad or is it a crew chief and it's my son or it's my driver. But like I said, I wouldn't give any of that up. It was so much fun. I mean, where do you get to spend that type of quality, not time, quality time? Win together, lose together, all the talks on the way to the track, away from the track.
all the sleeping away from the track.
Sleeping. Yeah, because, here we are, and we raced Friday and Saturday nights, 2 karts. I mean, it was just, where do you stop? But it's it's a whole day. You get there at, I think it was 11 o'clock.
11, 12 o'clock, I think so.
Yeah. And you left at sometimes 10, 11, 12 o'clock at night. And it's a regular league night racing.
I will say this, and that's the one thing we'll get into whenever we talk about cars. And like I said, we'll do another episode all on cars because that's a whole ball game. But the one thing I liked about cars is there's a whole fan base of it, where karts there wasn't. I did enjoy our time with karts, but the one thing that is pretty sad is when you get to the level of cars and who you get to hang out with and the fans and the people and basically people watching. Football, basketball, anything there's still people watching. A high school game, there's still people watching. So one thing about the go-karts that kind of is bumming is all that work you do, and I found this out mainly when I started driving from the kart by myself, is we bring our stuff to the track, we do practice, go back to our trailer in our little hole, run heat races, go back to our little hole, run the feature race, maybe shake some hands, say congratulations, whatever, go back to our little hole and go home. There wasn't anything bigger than that. Where compared to football or basketball, anything like that, you had your stands, you had your cheering section and everything like that. So I do wish that carts were a little bit bigger when it came to stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, you had fans, but that was just people watching their kids. I mean, you know, for that small of a hobby sport, to have that type of following when you're in that group is pretty amazing. You know, it really is, because, you know, anybody that races will tell you that it has to be a family thing.
Yeah.
And back to talking about the time we spent together. So I mean, you can't compare it. And then on top of that, we were spending 10, 12 hours during the week together. So to spend that much time with your kid every single week, and down in Florida, we race 10 months out of the year.
Yeah.
I mean,
it was, I would say, actually one other thing that I would like to add to it that I wish I knew back then, and that's something that could be a big effect on the relationship, on the strain, is you want to compete, this is going to be really, really hard to say, because you want to compete, you want to win, especially when you get to a high enough level that you can do it, is I would say stop. I would say take a break. Maybe a year that you don't run for championships, you don't run for points. Just a year, then the next year you go big, and then the next year you take a break. Because the biggest thing that I learned is doing it week in and week out and week in and week out, day after day after day after day. That's the strain, is there's never a stopping point. There's never a break. It's like when it rains out, you're like, that's your break. If it rains out, you're like, okay, at least we're not racing.
Or you get that extra week off when it's hot and
yeah,
June, July, August, whatever.
So I think that would probably be the only thing that enjoy those times, which we come to learn later on in the car side, is when we get that little bit of breathing room, that we take full advantage of it, because it was you eat, sleep, bread, ate more, race. It was just all that, where I think if we took more of a break, we would have got to enjoy it. So during those years, if we took a year of not racing for points, you could race that weekend, take a break. Hey, we'll race in 2 weeks or whatever it was. That'd probably be the big thing.
Well, the biggest thing is it costs the same amount of money whether you run 2 races or 5 races or whatever. Take a week off or whatever. The other thing is there's no practice, like we talked about. So your practice is competing when you actually are on the track competing. So it's not like, well, if we miss a couple races, but we're practicing, we're getting better, whatever it might be. I think that's part of it. But, it's like everything else, whatever, you talk about, well, let's not be so competitive and run for points. We're going to run what they call outlaws. That's where it came from, is you just hop from track to track and have some fun. And that would be fine, but I think a lot of the competitive juices, because you don't have anything, you get a trophy. Okay, so
I will say this: the Georgia Karting Complex, which is actually located near us in South Carolina, it's in Georgia, just across the border. So down in Florida, we would race for some races. I mean, I remember seeing 200-300 to win races, and that was big. Like I said, you want nothing to win a $200 to $300 race is amazing. But these Georgia races, I've seen them race for $100,000 on a go-kart. If that don't tell you how much money is in this sport, it's crazy. But that is a national. That's like going for the Olympics. Like you're facing when you race that class. Usually usually on a local track, we usually have 15 drivers max on a local night. On a big WKA night, we'd have about 25 racers. That race, easily each class is between 50 to 150 racers.
Yeah, there's some, you may not even qualify for that race, but guess what? You had to pay the same entry as anybody else. So the competitive level is just so high. I would guess a lot of people could there's similarities. With the open wheel asphalt type of karting, I think people are more familiar with. Obviously, your recreational go karts is all on asphalt, but that's where you hear people that get rides and move up the ladder, and motorcycles a lot with what do they call that? Sponsor. You're on a sponsored team, so that part of it you could see it growing up. In dirt karting, not so much. Not so much. There are people that have done it. A lot of people will say, I cut my teeth on the growth, the roots of dirt.
Yeah.
And a lot of I don't want to ruffle anybody's feathers about dirt and asphalt, but I think you can feel the car better, and you've got more opportunities and capabilities when you're on the dirt.
Yeah.
Where
it's funny that the joke is racing is or dirt is where the racing's at, but asphalt gets you there.
Yeah.
And
asphalt gets you there, dirt's where you race.
Yeah, and the thing that it is a joke / truth is, I still think, and even the dirt. It's hard to talk to the asphalt people because they say no, asphalt's where it's at. But the guys that have raced both will say that dirt is where the racing is, whether it's go-karts, especially cars. But asphalt is how you get there, whether it's getting there to the track is the joke. But racing itself, if you want to grow up in racing, if you want to be a superstar, you start racing the asphalt karts, and you go to a little bit of four cylinders, then you go to legend cars.
Right, and your goal is NASCAR.
Your goal is NASCAR. And the dirt side.
And nowadays you do have Dirt Pro, but I think that's 10 times harder to get into, because no matter what, each level, you have to have help in sponsorship. And I'm not talking about McDonald's or Burger King or that type of sponsorship. You're talking about.
Hey, we had our sponsors in go-karts.
Yeah, we'll talk about that. Yeah, I mean, we're the team that showed up in matching shirts. Fans had matching shirts, our parents or whatever you might call it, and
they were polos too, not just any shirts.
I mean, everything we've done and matching hats. Nobody had anything. In karting like that.
But sponsors is a big thing, like you're saying, is when you spend that much money, at least have a backing. And that's the other thing is, I think back then, and I don't know, because we were big into racing or big into karts, but being in South Carolina next to Georgia, I see a lot of the big companies here for karting, and they have big sponsors behind them. The people that make the tires, that make the fuel, that make the prep. There's a lot bigger sponsors here. And so I don't know if it's something that back then there was big sponsors going around. I think everybody was kind of fending for themselves for the most part.
Yeah, because when you talk about sponsor in racing, it's actually a sponsor of racing. When you talk about when you play baseball, coach pitch, whatever it might be, that sponsor's there to pay for your jerseys, and it's Joe's Pizza Shop.
Yeah.
Our sponsorship is actually getting somebody that is a tire company or is fuel or whatever. Somebody can pick up tab here and there. It's a lot different sponsorship. So you actually have to go out there and perform to earn those, not just knock on a door at a business and say, hey, you want to sponsor me? I'm Joe Schmo. But what we did in the beginning laid the groundwork for some of the best sponsorships we ever had at the car level for a team that was nobody's again.
So that's where I'm gonna end this with is kind of a final story. So we did the go-karts for, again, about 6-7 years. I started off with one kart for me, and then we ended up with 2 karts for me, and then we ended up with 3 karts. So it was me for 2 karts and Dad with one. We used to travel here and there. We had a big enough trailer that we could take them all in, and it had a little coach area. So we kind of got as big as we wanted to. But then we used to travel again to East Bay Raceway, which was the car track on the outside. The money that we saw people putting into the car track on a day-to-day on a week-to-week basis was almost the same as karts. So he made the jump, and which we'll get into a little bit on another time. But we get into cars, we sell everything. We have no kart stuff left. We sold the tires, we sold the rims, chains, carts, trailer. We sold it all. We sold it absolutely all. And we go to the final championship for East Bay, the final championship night, where I got my trophy and got this, that, whatever. And or was it Dirt Devil?
As far as the banquet?
Yeah, the banquet.
That was Dirt Devil.
So Dirt Devil's banquet.
Every week that you go to Dirt Devil, when you pay for your entry fee, they give you a little
so they
ticket.
have drawings. So you go. That was for the championship year, because again we were ending it. We are going to end that, start the beginning in
It
cars.
was awards banquet.
It was the awards banquet, just like you do in any other sport. But during the year you pay your money and they put your name in a hat for a big raffle. The big raffle at the end of the year was a brand new top of the line chassis. Most part race ready, no engine, no tires, no body, but chassis.
I mean, you're talking
It was
$2,100 back then. I still don't think they're that expensive nowadays.
I have no idea. I know
$2,100 for a go-kart.
That was just
that you still had to put tires and engine and everything on it. That was seat.
It was probably a third of what the car of the whole car. If you want to race ready, just hop in top of the line. It was a third of it, but it was still a frame ready to go, race ready. And
everybody knew that we were done that year. Mm-hmm. That when we went into that banquet, we had made the announcement that because we sold probably 75-80% of it to Henry.
Yeah,
and a lot of that was at a great price because of what he had done to us. But I said, let's look into this new class that they've got for younger people. And
so we're at the banquet and it's all over because they did this at the end of the night and we ended up winning the go-kart chassis.
I mean, that's the big ticket at the end of the night.
The big ticket, and we ended up winning the go-kart chassis when we have everything sold. So we ended up flipping it that night and selling it for...
We auctioned it at $1,700.
$1,700 for the frame to get out of there. So it was pretty funny that we ended up winning a frame. And the speed of the story, we got out of it, started getting cars, and started racing in Georgia, because in South Carolina, the East Bay Raceway... The car track, I was 12 years old when I started racing, and I was too young. They didn't want to take the liability for a 12-year-old going around a car track racing against 40, 50, 60, 70-year-old guys. So I ended up racing cars after that. But
as funny as our story is starting, and there's a lot of people out there that probably started the way we do. Mm-hmm. Not everybody has that type of a background. But if you thought that story was entertaining, imagine now I've got a 12-year-old with a little bit of knowledge, which makes him dangerous, and now I've put him in a race car. So not just those race cars that you see, they rip the seats out and they make it into a 4-cylinder.
So if it tells you the level of it, so you have when the very base model of racing, if you talk about cars, you got front wheel drives. Front wheel drives you run 4 cylinders, four cylinders you run street stock, then modified street. Then you run there's young guns in between there, and then you run a hobby class, and then you run 602s. So there's all these classes to go through, and we jump all the way to 602 late models, full-size car.
At that time, the only thing above us was limited and supers. And, there wasn't even 12-year-olds racing 4 cylinders back then.
No, it was...
And I said, you know what? I know absolutely nothing about those other classes.
But we've been here before, so might as well start now.
So I'm like, well, at least there's classes I can go to and stuff like that. But this was even worse, I think, as far as here we are now. If you thought setting up a go-kart was bad, now we're setting up a race car that looks like might as well have been the space shuttle.
Yeah.
And again, we're back to he doesn't know. It's a total different way of driving. You have suspension. You are sideways.
Not to mention, I go from having no seatbelt or anything, and it's a flat car. So basically, my shoulders my shoulders up are wide open, so I can see everything. To a cockpit, so I can't see nothing but what's in front of me out of a little window. So there's a huge experience, a huge thing going on. and we're starting from scratch all over again, starting from the beginning.
Yeah, and you've got 400 horsepower doing 90 plus miles an hour with 26, for the most part on a really good night,
Grown adults.
Grown adults, yep. And you're slinging vehicles. I mean, you're talking, people have died,
Yep.
And people have been seriously injured. And if you thought this was entertaining, this one will blow your mind, because you could just imagine a 12-year-old and racing that.
So with that ending, I greatly appreciate everybody hanging out. We had a kind of a slow start, but we wanted to get you the whole background on how everything went.
Yeah, there's just so much involved.
Correct.
In the amount of years we did it, the levels. We haven't even gotten into some of the funniest stories you could ever think of.
My sister actually raced one time. She's been volleyball forever, and they do powder puff races. So my sister ended up racing one night and almost won. First time out, never raced a kart. I'm over here struggling, doing everything I can.
Never won at that track, and she gets in. She's leading 18 of the 20 laps, and it was for. The winner got a $50 gift certificate to Outback.
Yep, that sounds right.
And we were dying. She's a great athlete.
Yeah, we were very lucky. She did well. I had nothing against her because she did a really, really good job. But we also got handed a very, very good cart. A good friend of ours who was in a higher division, so it was a very powerful cart, very good cart, set up perfectly. He let her borrow it, and it was amazing. It was an awesome experience. And the only reason that caught her is, again, kind of what happened to me. I don't know if I got too cocky, too scared. I don't know what it was, but went a little too high and spun out. Didn't hit nothing, just spun out, got back on the track, and I think finished third. But could have won the whole thing. But
and that was just so disheartening, because here you are. You're a racer and have never won at that track, and your sister gets in there. And speaking of that, just one last thing about karting is Kyer raced. Probably a fifth of the field was female.
Yeah.
And that's what was really cool back then.
Yep.
You guys got along, and there wasn't any animosity between girls and guys. There were some talented girls.
Yep.
There really was, and the boys respected that. And, not every dad has a son, so, and they become friends because, like he says, it's family. It is. You have it's a race family. He didn't have friends at home. Mm-mm. There wasn't any time. There's no time to have friends.
I remember playing most of my sports. We either played soccer or even flag football or anything along those lines at the go-kart track, because when I was so young that I didn't know what to do, I couldn't set up, couldn't move, couldn't adjust. So me and the kids are guys, buddies, friends.
You say, Dad. It was always, Dad. Am I good to go?
Am I good to go?
Yeah.
And he goes, yeah, we're good. And so I'd go hang out and play with my friends because it was a friendly thing to do.
And we had barbecues, even though we were competing and racing and all that stuff. Everybody had barbecues,
but you talk about the girls that were there, and once they put the helmet on, you don't know they're girls, and it shouldn't be a factor anyways in any type of sport. But that one specifically is. Every racer is a racer.
And they're racing with a chip on their shoulder because they are a girl.
Oh, yeah, I know.
So they're really out there driving hard.
I was going to say that I know a lot of the racers, I can almost tell when it was a girl by not how gentle they were, but how rough they were, because I feel like they always had to prove something, which they were still very, very good. But guys, I greatly appreciate it. We're definitely going to do this again for part 2 when we start going into late models. Again, that's a whole aspect that I'm super excited to talk about. That was most of my career of racing, so we'll definitely get into that sometime soon. But for now, peace.